everyone, and thank you for joining us in this GLBC webinar series. I am pleased to introduce you to Dr. Szabolc Hargittay, who is joining us from Budapest and will be doing a webinar on the compliance issues with GDPR and blockchain technology. Dr. Hargittay, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Kim. Good afternoon or good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk about GDPR and blockchain with special regard to the conflicts and commonalities. First of all, let's ask you an interesting question. I think it is a really easy one. So, when did the GDPR come into effect? A, 1st of January 2019. B, GDPR is not effective currently, it is just a proposal. C, 25th of May 2018. D, GDPR has been already adopted, but at the time it is not effective. So, C. The answer is C. Okay. So I would like to explain some basic elements and principles of GDPR in order to understand the potential conflict with the blockchain technology. GDPR is a far-reaching privacy legislation that is designed to enhance the protection of personal data and give individuals in the EU greater control over their own personal data. GDPR is requiring not only transparency into what companies will do with consumer data, but also mandating clear consent mechanism to ensure that consumers understand what companies are sharing, with whom, and for what purpose. GDPR thereby regulates the transfer, processing, collection and retention of every EU citizen personal data, requiring companies to provide visibility and control to individuals on demand. Non-compliance with GDPR can result in heavy fines. In addition, GDPR has a number of key provisions that could heavily impact blockchain. Okay, personal data. GDPR applies to personal data, thereby embracing a very broad definition. In short, it means any data that can be tied back to person's identity. Moreover, personal data explicitly includes online identifiers, including IP addresses. Under the GDPR, personal data even includes data that has undergone pseudonymization, meaning that the data has been processed such that it can no longer be attributed to a specific data subject without the use of additional information. Data controllers. Under the GDPR, increased emphasis has been put on data controllers, that is firms, requiring them to comply with various GDPR principles, including processing data legally and fairly. The GDPR thereby applies to the processing of personal data by controllers established in the European Union, as well as companies outside the EU, where their processing activities relate to offering goods or services to data subject in the EU or to the monitoring of their behavior. It should be noted that GDPR was first proposed by the European regulators long before blockchain was a trend. It is therefore not surprising that the initial focus of the regulators was on social network companies such as Facebook, Google, with centralized platforms. Where a data controller plays an important role, they are opposed to the decentralized blockchain ledgers. Yeah, the right to be forgotten. That is a very important thing. The data subjects have a right to obtain from the controller confirmation as to whether or not their personal data is being processed, including the information or recipients to whom the personal data have been or will be disclosed. They also have the right to ask the data controller to correct his or her personal information in case it is inaccurate. This is the right to rectification. The most important, at the same time, the most critical provision from a blockchain point of view is the right to erasure, or better known as the right to be forgotten. It enables individuals to request any organization to delete their personal information and all the data related to them from the database in which it is stored permanently, if the personal data are no longer necessary in relation to the purposes for which they were collected or otherwise processed, and there is no legal ground for their maintenance. Data protection by design and default. is a very important principle of GDPR. In addition to the explicit declaration of the rights of the data subject, data portability, data access, right to erasure, etc., the GDPR also mandates that data controllers and processors abide by the principle of data protection and privacy by design and default. The EU stipulates the system must be designed in such a way that minimizes extraneous data collection and guards what is necessary for operations. This means designing solutions with privacy as a fundamental consideration rather than as an afterthought or add-on. It includes, wherever possible, employing techniques such as pseudonymization, decoupling data from individual identity, and data minimization, sharing only absolutely necessary data points to protect privacy. The next chapter, blockchain terminology. What is blockchain? Blockchain technology has been around for quite some time, now still actively being in the spotlight. Even though there are some mixed feelings toward this technology, yet no one can entirely underestimate its role in the global economic landscape. The technology first came into the spotlight through Bitcoin, a very popular cryptocurrency. What Bitcoin brought to our attention is the blockchain technology itself. Blockchain technology isn't just a backup network for cryptocurrencies, but it offers a lot more. So what are the blockchain features that make it so irresistible? Immutability. There are some exciting blockchain features, but among them, immutability is undoubtedly one of the key features of blockchain technology. But why is this technology uncorrupted? Immutability means something that can be changed or altered. This is one of the blockchain features that help to ensure that the technology will remain as it is, a permanent, unalterable network. But how does it remain that way? Blockchain technology works slightly different than the typical banking system. Instead of relying on centralized authorities, it ensures the blockchain features through a collection of nodes. Every node on the system has a copy of the digital ledger. To add a transaction, every node needs to check its validity. If the majority thinks it's valid, then it's added to the ledger. This promotes transparency and makes it corruption-proof, that is, tamper-proof. So without the consent from the majority of nodes, no one can add any transaction blocks to the ledger. Another fact that supports the blockchain features is that once the transaction blocks get added on the ledger, no one can just go back and change it. Thus, any user on the network won't be able to update, edit, or delete it. The next very important feature is enhanced security. As it gets rid of the need for central authority, nobody can just simply change any characteristics of the network for their benefit. Using encryption ensures another layer of security for the system. But how does it offer so much security compared to already existing technologies? Well, it's extremely secure because it offers a special disguise, cryptography. Added with decentralization, cryptography lays another layer of protection for users. Cryptography is a rather complex mathematical algorithm that acts as a firewall for attacks. Every information on a blockchain is hashed cryptographically. In simple terms, the information on the network hides the true nature of the data. For this process, any input data gets through a mathematical algorithm that produces a different kind of value, but the length is always fixed. You could think of it as a unique identification for every data. All the blocks in the ledger come with a unique hash of its own and contain the hash of the previous block. So, changing or trying to tamper with the data, we remain changing all the hash IDs. And that's kind of impossible. You will have a private key to access the data, but we'll have a public key to make transactions. The next feature is decentralized technology. The network is decentralized, meaning it doesn't have any governing authority or a single person looking after the framework. Rather, a group of nodes maintains the network making it decentralized. This is one of the key features of blockchain technology that works perfectly. Let me make it simpler. Blockchain puts us user in a straightforward position. As the system doesn't require any governing authority, we can directly access it from the web and store our assets there. You can store anything, starting from cryptocurrency, important documents, agreements, contracts, or other valuable digital assets. And with the help of blockchain, you will have direct control over them using your private key. So you see the decentralized structure is giving the common people their power and rights back on their assets. Distributed ledger. Usually a public ledger will provide every information about the transaction and the participant. It's all out in the open, nowhere to hide. Although the case for private or federated blockchain is a bit different. But still, in those cases, many people can see what really goes on in the ledger. That's because the ledger on the network is maintained by all other users on the system. This distributed the computational power across the computers to ensure a better outcome. This is the reason it's considered one of the blockchain essential features. The result will always be a higher efficient ledger system that can take on the traditional ones. And last but not least, consensus. Every blockchain thrives because of the consensus algorithms. The architecture is cleverly designed, and consensus algorithms are at the core of this architecture. Every blockchain has a consensus to help the network make decisions. In simple terms, the consensus is a decision-making process for the group of nodes active on the network. Here, the nodes can come to an agreement quickly and relatively faster. When millions of nodes are validating a transaction, a consensus is absolutely necessary for a system to run smoothly. You could think of it as a kind of voting system where the majority wins and the minority has to support it. The consensus is responsible for the network to be trustless. Nodes might not trust each other, but they can trust the algorithms that run at the core of it. That's why every decision on the network is a winning scenario for the blockchain. It's one of the benefits of blockchain features. Okay, now let's see what are the commonalities. Now let's see what the common features in the GDPR and blockchain are. There are many, I think. Could blockchain comply with GDPR regulation? To answer that question, it is needed to look at both the point of conflict as well as the commonalities between both. At first glance, GDPR and blockchain are fundamentally contrary approaches. But looking more broadly, there are various points where GDPR and blockchain share common ground. It is, however, a strange coincidence that while in a strict way, blockchain technology is in conflict and so not compatible with GDPR regulation, when one looks more in a principle-based way, GDPR and blockchain share many common objectives. A closer look at blockchain's underlying concepts and technologies reveals how the technology improves the fundamental aspects of data privacy and security specified in GDPR. EU regulators and blockchain technologists alike, therefore, would do well to remember that blockchain and GDPR are both trying to do the same thing. Blockchain thereby offers increased provenance, transparency, privacy, and security of data. Blockchain technology just tackles this issue differently from GDPR. First of all, transparency. On a blockchain, all transactions are clearly visible and highly transparent for those with access to the blockchain. The blockchain uses encryption to remain confidential, but the ledger itself remains transparent. Blockchain's encryption and decentralized structure makes the network and data highly tamper-proof and, in theory, less vulnerable to unauthorized modification than a single instance database. Next important commonality is the anonymity. Another common principle is anonymity. Blockchains have the ability to offer anonymity. Only those transacting on the network can see the information, and in permission networks, even those on the network can be restricted from seeing other participant information. The private keys allow for access, while the public key is an address for inter-user transaction detached from any personal identifying elements. What this means is that even though a blockchain is public, no personal information is made public. Individual control. One of the common principles is individual control over personal information and data minimization. Blockchain technology, when used for digital identity solutions, offers individuals unprecedented control over the ways their personal data is shared and used. Additionally, by decentralizing transaction processing, distributed ledger systems remove the vulnerabilities commonly exploited in centralized data repositories. What makes blockchain so revolutionary is the ability to store information across a variety of systems for improved security. Rather than allowing for an identifiable single point of failure, a blockchain ledger makes single breach failures hardly possible. Now, the conflicts. Unfortunately, there are many conflicts. GDPR, however, has a number of key rules that could heavily impact blockchain or blockchain technology. At first glance, some GDPR provisions seem in direct conflict with the fundamentals of blockchain technology and may even be incompatible with what the new European privacy rules seek to uphold. For blockchain, the most controversial GDPR mandate is the right to be forgotten, giving individuals the right to request that their personal data be removed from a record. Because of its decentralized character with immutable blockchains, data, however, cannot be deleted. Blockchains are designed to last forever. That puts blockchain in direct opposition to the GDPR rules. The main question is, are there ways to be found so the GDPR and blockchain may coexist? Can blockchain work properly in tandem with the new GDPR regulation without harming its fundamentals? And how should regulators react? Point of conflicts. It is not surprising that GDPR causes many worries in the blockchain world. The requirements for data deletion and data editing seem to be in direct conflict with the way the blockchain technology functions. There are a number of fundamental points where blockchain completely contradicts the GDPR mandates. Just look at the main features of this technology. Blockchain relies on a distributed ledger system that is decentralized and immutable. It is intended to be a permanent and a tamper-proof record outside the control of any governing authority. Information on the blockchain, including personal information of data subjects, cannot be modified or deleted. Therefore, if blockchain were to be used as a type of database to transact with personal data, it would by default go against the GDPR rules. This conflict between the GDPR and blockchain-based approaches to data privacy is rooted in two fundamentally different philosophies about how best to protect data privacy. Blockchain believes that privacy rights are best protected by advanced cryptography and distributed ledger system of storage and protection that is decentralized and immutable. This characteristic of blockchain fundamentally contrasts with those of centralized forms of data management, where there is a clear controller of data that regulators had in mind when fashioning the GDPR. They view centralized governmental authority as essential to protect consumers and their information against the abuses of private actors, particularly the new massive data-driven technology companies such as Amazon, Facebook, Google, etc. Immutability. The biggest point of conflict between blockchain and GDPR is the right to be forgotten, as I said earlier. GDPR mandates that it should be possible for any personal data of EU citizens stored within a business to be altered or deleted at the request of the individual to whom the data pertains. The immutable nature of the blockchain's decentralized ledger, ensuring the absolute integrity of the records in the chain in terms of security and accuracy, is a core idea within blockchain technology. Due to the blockchain immutability of records principle, any data contained on the blockchain transaction are virtually impossible to modify or being erased to meet GDPR requirements. They stay there forever. So instead of the right to be forgotten, in blockchain, there is a right to never forget. Any alteration would undermine the entire system, as blockchains are linkages of subsequent blocks, and a single core block will impact the whole. Since this would break the chain in a sense, it would render the complete blockchain useless. It can only be updated by adding a new transaction to the chain. So, who will be the data controller? Nodes or nobody? Another point of conflict is the role of data controllers. While GDPR puts a lot of accountability on data controllers in centralized organizations, which are easy to define, it is another story for blockchain. There it is very difficult to see who falls within the GDPR defined roles and who really is in control of this data in a decentralized blockchain environment. In a distributed ledger system, anyone who joins the peer-to-peer network and runs the software becomes a node. Essentially, a node is a device connected to a blockchain network which supports the network by maintaining a copy of the blockchain. The nodes process data without having full control over how the system works. There is, however, no authority to amend or correct a block once it is incorporated into the chain. Once the data goes through the application and onto the chain, the blockchain company that enables you to put that data onto the chain is no longer in control of data that since it is decentralized. This position then raises the question, if the blockchain company isn't the data controller, then who is? In a sense, every person who accesses the network, so every node, may be considered the data controller. They control what happens to their data and who is shared with through their private key. In my opinion, the problem is that unlike centralized controllers, nodes and data subjects in a blockchain cannot comply with GDPR obligation, considering their limited influence over the information stored on the ledger. Okay, so another question. I think this is also an easy one. What is the maximum fine that can be imposed by the supervisory authority concerning a data protection breach? A, up to 500,000 euro, B, up to 20 million euro, or 4% of the total worldwide annual turnover. C, there is no possibility to impose a fine. And D, up to 10 million euro. So the right answer is B. Yeah. Okay. Now we can see the potential solution. First of all, we can check the technical level, and after that, the regulatory framework. Yeah. So there is a lot of debate going around how to solve the GDPR compliance issue for blockchain. Frankly speaking, it is safe to assume that at the present time, most blockchains as they are designed today are not GDPR compliant and therefore illegal. That, however, doesn't mean that solutions aren't available. There are a number of ways to mitigate the impact of GDPR on blockchain and enable blockchain companies to become more compliant for future coexistence with GDPR regulations. Off-chain storage. This is my favorite. One potential solution is segregating the types of data stored on the chain. This by storing all personally identifiable information in separate off-chain databases and only have references and other information along with a hash of this data in the blockchain. The corresponding hashes stored in the blockchain layer serve as control pointers to the GDPR sensitive data. Protocols can be built in such a way that make it possible to completely erase data in the off-chain database in compliance with the GDPR requirements. So when someone exercises their right to be forgotten, the personal data can be deleted, whereby the service provider erases the linkability of the blockchain hash pointer to the data located in distributed off-chain servers. This makes the referral information on the blockchain useless without shattering the blockchain. There are, however, a number of disadvantages using this solution, as it would be to the detriment of some features the blockchain offers. It does negate the security and efficiency benefits of blockchain, thereby reducing the blockchain's effectiveness and transparency. So once your data has been stored off-chain, who owns it? If blockchain platforms split data storage, your information is vulnerable to hacking. By storing personal data off-chain, you have no way of knowing for sure who accesses your data and who has access to your data. The added complexity may not only result in less secure systems, it would also make it more difficult for the development and adoption of global standards, potentially limiting the deployment of blockchain for uses like trade finance, supply chain, etc. An alternative solution, already adopted by certain blockchain companies, is to keep personal information on the blockchain while making it impossible to access if the data subject demands that it will be deleted. This could be achieved by such means as encrypting all personal data with key or hash that allows access to an individual's information stored on the blockchain, and that could be revoked, deleted, or requested, or after some interval. In the event that a data subject would request his blockchain data to be erased, the key would be deleted. This would render the information unobtainable, and in effect, it would be lost in the blockchain forever. Whether GDPR officials will accept this as a solution, however, remains to be seen. It is well established that data that has been encrypted or hashed still qualify as a personal data under EU law, as it is merely pseudonymized, not irreversibly anonymized. Since throwing away your encryption keys is not the same as erasure of data. Existing GDPR rules prohibits from storing personal data on a blockchain level, thereby losing the ability to enhance control of their own personal data. The challenge is that GDPR does not define what it means to erase data. The other solution is pseudonymization and anonymization. Another interesting way for GDPR compliance is the use of pseudonymization techniques in combination with data stored off-chain. In order for data to be considered pseudonymized under GDPR, the data must no longer be attributed to a specific data subject without the use of additional information. Pseudonymization with pointers to personal data stored off-chain in a manner which allows the personal data to be destroyed and thus removes the link to the data on the chain and renders it anonymized may allow a user to remove all of their personal information from the chain as required by the GDPR's right to erasure. There are, however, two opposite interpretations for the pseudonym linkage using blockchain relating to GDPR. The first one states that because data pseudonymization is accomplished in blockchain hashing, but not anonymization, the data linkage is no longer considered personal when it is established, and if this linkage is deleted, it also complies with GDPR. I think this opinion is right. But the second and opposite interpretation is that pseudonymization, even with all cryptographic hashes, can still be linked back to the original personal data. Pseudonymous data, unlike anonymous data, therefore still allows for re-identification. Why pseudonymization technique make it more challenging for users to identify data subjects? It does not scrub all identifying personal information. Sovereign application, a very interesting solution. This is a solution for protecting personal data according to the GDPR rules, is one where individuals control their own digital identities using blockchain technology. This is the self-sovereign identity application. This protocol named Sovereign suggests that individuals control the information related to their person. the sovereign ledger doesn't store personal data. Instead, it acts like a directory of pointers to an individual's data, stored in more traditional, centralized databases, and takes additional steps to implement the GDPR's privacy by design and default principles. Under this regime, individuals give limited access to third parties and provide only that information that is needed to transact the business at hand and only for that specific purpose. Because the record of the access is recorded to the blockchain, just like the GDPR requirements, there would be an immutable record of who was accessing the information and how the information was being used. Another solution is increased use of private and enterprise blockchains. So another way of softening the GDPR requirements is the increased use of private or enterprise blockchain, which are blockchain systems used by one company or amongst companies in a particular industry. Unlike public blockchains, which providing decentralized utility and access to as many users as possible, private and enterprise blockchain limit the dissemination of personal information to just one company or a limited number of companies. In reducing the scale of the chain, fewer individuals have access to sensitive information, and the possibility of data breaches may significantly diminish. The most far-reaching way to get around these GDPR issues would be for blockchain to modify how it operates, which would mean implementing a centralized backend system. This is another solution. This would allow data to be anonymized without breaking any chains and seemingly navigate the problem of non-GDPR compliance. But it would mean a significant overhaul of how the platform is implemented, thereby threatening the fundamentals of blockchain. Okay, so we finished the technical level. Now we can talk the regulatory framework. So the most important question is that who should adapt in this situation? Blockchain or regulators? In general, technology development has not been at the forefront of data protection policy development in Europe for long. GDPR was first discussed by the European Commission in 2012, at the time when blockchain technology was just coming up. The legislation, however, was launched right at the time when blockchain technology fundamentally changed the rules. One could say that blockchain is not designed to be GDPR compatible, or said in another way, GDPR in this purest form is not blockchain compatible the way the regulation was written to date. They do not take into account of the newly developed decentralized blockchain technology designed to exist outside of central control. The biggest challenge is how to proceed. In other words, who should adapt? It doesn't make sense to regulate the blockchain industry in a rigid way. In order for the blockchain technology to unfold its full potential, there needs to be careful consideration by regulators. This asks from European authorities to take a practical approach to regulating blockchain technologies. The first step is to bring more clarity on how to interpret the various rules. Regulators should also be asked to bring more flexibility in the regulatory stance. And because of the GDPR is built on the premise that there are only centralized databases to control, this asks for amendments in the present GDPR rules to take blockchain into account. So, give companies enough time, no rigid GDPR approach. This is very important. The enforcement angle of GDPR compliance is still unclear. Legal enforcement of not being GDPR compliant short term would be very difficult. There are still a large number of uncertainties, unclarities in definition and interpretation of the various GDPR principles and rules and gray areas that first should be solved or removed before regulators can really start enforcement. Maintaining these GDPR rules in a too strict way would be impractical. It would be almost impossible for any court to enforce any action against public blockchains, as there is no one in charge, no one to serve documents to, no one to even name on legal papers. In practice, the court would prosecute everyone on the network. With private blockchains, it's a much better fit. European authorities will need to give blockchain companies as well regulatory bodies time to adapt. So, Hungarian regulation. Hungary adopted the GDPR rules, and the Hungarian Data Protection Authority announced an opinion regarding cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. According to the opinion, the blockchain technology was used to develop a virtual payment system that can be used anonymously, so it does not require any personal data. Certainly, it is possible to use a system with blockchain technology in which the blocks are also used to store personal data. If some blocks in the blockchain are also used to store personal data, the basic question is, who constitutes a data controller in this case? This is the key point. According to the GDPR and the Hungarian law, data controller is the entity who determines the purpose and the aim of the processing of personal data. Since we are talking about a decentralized network, it is difficult to recognize who the data controller is. As a blockchain technology, every user who adds blocks and stored data to the system, for example, mining the Bitcoin system, is considered a data controller. We can see that the Hungarian authority struggles to fully understand the new technologies. The concept of all miners being a data controller can hardly be the correct interpretation. It is likely that the EU legislation will develop a data protection practice that will be taken into consideration by the Hungarian authority. So, self-regulation. In the short term, the best approach could be to let the blockchain industry self-regulate and come up with its own mechanism to protect personal data. Blockchain startups can start by collecting lesser data points and implementing hashes to restrict exposure of personal data. Very important, creating legal certainty and clarity. Regulators should give more clarification how to interpret the various rules, but also how the GDPR will be applied to blockchains. The GDPR provides no clear answers yet and still has to address many of these rules, such as the right to be forgotten and its enforcement. For instance, the GDPR's definition of personal data. The definition extends to anything that can be traced back to an identifiable person, including IP addresses, a unique public key or address on the blockchain, and thus potentially falls within a regulatory gray area. The GDPR does not define what erasure of data really means, which suggests that to comply with this requirement, actual physical and logical deletion is required. It is unclear if a user can truly be forgotten as opposed to permanently anonymous with no ability to tie the blockchain back to a specific user and the data exchange event. Strong arguments can be made that the GDPR's right to erasure, rectification, and data portability are not implicated. There is a good case to make by saying that erasure does not have to imply that data is literally deleted and that making data permanently inaccessible without deletion should produce the same result and be classed as deletion of data. There are other unanswered questions. If there is no private copy to delete, why not completely exempt blockchain companies from this requirement? And why impose a fine on a controller for not deleting his own copy, but not hold him liable for the deleting all public copies for technology and cost reasons? And a number of other issues need to be addressed in order for blockchain-based platforms to be 100% GDPR compliant. As there are also various exceptions to the GDPR rules, but most are not yet clearly communicated. Regulatory flexibility and balanced approach are very important. GDPR regulators do have to take care of new innovative developments. They should take into account that decentralized solutions like blockchain are increasingly entering the real-world arena. This asks for the well-needed flexibility from the regulators in their interoperation of the GDPR rules, taking account the specific features of blockchain including immutability, centralized structure, and lack of central data controllers. Regulators should thereby carefully balance the objectives of both sides between data protection and privacy on one side and technological innovation on the other. This asks for some favorable interpretation by EU regulators in their approach to blockchain application, in particular in respect of the nature of the data controller, whether public keys are personal data, and how substantive rights should be implemented. Future flexible frameworks for governance are needed that allow us to realize the benefits of data and technology, including blockchain, while minimizing harms. It also asks from blockchain builders to build in specific privacy safeguards into the technology. They can reveal any and all personal data stored on chain. Cooperative approach, dialogue and common understanding. The blockchains of tomorrow will be shaped by today's regulatory input, is a saying by one blockchain follower. The EU must wake up to this new reality of decentralized platforms and engage in dialogue with the industry, innovators, and other stakeholders as to how this technology can be used in a manner that benefits society, also in respect to data protection. Regulators and developers must come to a mutual understanding about how to blend privacy controls with transparent transaction and bring the spirit of GDPR to the blockchain and vice versa. To get the most out of it, this asks for a layered and cooperative approach to policy making between the regulators and the blockchain industry. Regulators must thereby incentivize developers to safeguard, establish fundamental rights, protections, and provide guidance as to how compliance system can be built. Blockchain innovators, on the other hand, must be given freedom to develop their products while respecting regulatory principles. Amending the GDPR rules. As a result of this dialogue, somewhere down the line, regulators could consider appropriate amendments to the existing GDPR rules to account for the unique characteristics and specific of blockchains and other technology innovations. This adjustment should allow for a variation on the right to be forgotten that can accommodate the blockchain technology. Regulators should not wait too long in giving clarity on their future approach of blockchain. Long-lasting legal uncertainties around GDPR could signal an early end to blockchain progress. A practical instead of a dogmatic approach by GDPR is thereby recommended. In order for blockchain to be able to become compliant, the GDPR should change some of its conceptions, taking account of the specific of blockchain technology. A middle-of-the-road compromise, however, should be prevented, as that could hurt the fundamentals of blockchain technology, and as a consequence will hurt the immense benefits. I think it's now a matter of having to wait and see how this will happen in real life. In the meantime, the blockchain world should make as much noise, positive noise, as possible about it towards regulators and hope to get the right attention from them. Being two sides of the same private data coin, one should keep in mind that the combination of GDPR and the use of distributed ledger technology have the potential to improve the way in which firms collect, store, and process private information. With blockchain technologies emerging, we have new ways to further strengthen data ownership, transparency, and trust between entities. Finally, I would like to quote from Thomas Power, who is the member of the board of directors at Blockchain Industry Compliance and Regulation Association. So, first, the GDPR and blockchain will battle and challenge. Then they will harmonize because they are not enemies, rather frenemies. What I like about GDPR is it forces the highest data standards to citizens who choose to publish, store, or record their documents and transactions on the blockchain. So, thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody who joined us, and I also want to give a special thanks again to Dr. Szabolc Hargittay from Hargittay and Toth Law Firm in Budapest, Hungary. If anybody has any questions or would like additional information about the Global Legal Blockchain Consortium, please visit our website at www.legalconsortium.org. Thank you.